say that I recognize many names from the alumni network and the course discussion and so on. So welcome, everybody.
Great. So yeah, I just want to give you a kind of official welcome to our third Capra course webinar. This one's called Capra Course Goes to College, and Fritjof will say a few words about where that name came from. It's really exciting.
I can do that right away. This comes from a legendary jazz album by Dave Brubeck from the 1950s, which was called Jazz Goes to College. So I just mentioned this for those of you who are too old to remember jazz in the 1950s, but it's one of the greatest Dave Brubeck albums of that time. Okay.
And the significance here is it's with great pleasure that we have Joy O'Neill with us from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Stephen Point. Yep, Stephen Point. And yeah, we'll be hearing all about how Joy has used Capra course in one of her modules of a really interesting graduate program about sustainability. And yeah, so we are starting with a little introduction. After that, I will hand over to Fritjof, who will introduce and welcome Joy. They will have a conversation for around 30 minutes, and then we will be collecting questions from all of you who are listening in the chat, and then we will have a question and answer session with both Fritjof and Joy. And then after that, we'll have a wrap up. So we'll be finishing off at what is the time? 10:15 on California. No, sorry, 11:15 California time, and 7:15 UK time, and many other time zones. So 1/4 the next hour. And so, yeah, this is our third Capra course webinar, and we've really enjoyed hosting these, and we really hope to keep on hosting them. We had a previous webinar with Stephen Bingler where we discussed architecture and community design, which was really interesting. After that, we welcomed Terry Irwin from the Carnegie Mellon University, where she talked about transition design. And then the focus of this webinar is going to be education and bringing systems thinking into the education system. So we're using a really great technology platform here called Zoom. And it's very similar to Skype, but it's got some additional features which are really good for facilitating meetings online. We are using the mute options. So just so you know, all of you are muted as you enter the room. And that's just to make sure that we don't have lots of signal noise and interference. And instead, we'll use the chats for questions. And I think that's everything. I think I can hand over to Fritjof to introduce Joy.
Okay, thank you, Phoebe, for facilitating. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Joy O'Neill. Welcome, Joy, to our webinar. I really look forward to this conversation. Joy is a professor and director of Education for Sustainability, or EDSU, at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. One of the courses she teaches in this program is called Ecological Foundations for a Sustainable Society. It has the course 15, and this is the course where Joy has managed to integrate the Capra course into the curriculum of EDSU 913. Now, I should mention that from the early days when I started the Capra course, I had this vision that it should not only have professors and students from various universities as course participants, but might also integrate the Capra course into university curricula. And over the years, I have found that this is easier said than done, because universities, as you know, have their specialized departments, course levels, semester schedules, fee structures, and so on. To integrate our multidisciplinary course with its global network structure into such an academic framework is anything but easy. But Joy has successfully bypassed all these obstacles and has put together a pioneering program, which I think could be a model for other colleges and universities around the world. And so I'm very eager to hear more details about how you have done this, Joy. But before we go into this, I'd love to hear a little more about your own background. You are a transdisciplinary scholar. What does this mean within today's academic framework? And what has been your experience in transdisciplinary research and teaching? If you could say a little bit about that, that would be great.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Christoph, for having me. I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, I think I will just mute Fritjof while you speak.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's better. Thank you. Thank you for having me a part of this webinar series. I'm really excited to be here. First of all, I appreciate your take on the title of the webinar. My son's a jazz pianist here at UWSP, a student. So it really resonates with me, and also appreciate the take on the approach as it relates to enacting change in higher education through that title as well. A little bit of background about myself. And the reason why I consider myself a transdisciplinary scholar and what it means to current academic frameworks and my experiences of teacher research and writing. I'm a first-generation American, and my mother's from Mexico and my father is from Poland and Russia. So I think the story behind that is for another day, but I think it stems from who I am as a person coming from a background of a transcultural way of being brought up. So I think that stems, that's the very beginning roots of what draws me to understanding the world through the lens of transdisciplinarity. For example, my middle name that I use more formally is Ksenia, and it's Russian for hospitality to strangers. I was named this from my great-grandmother and infused in my daily life of how I was raised predominantly with my grandmother. So taking care of human and non-human has sort of been part of who I am in my way of being. I think that's why it led me to a degree in environmental science and then a subsequent master's in water resources and a doctoral degree in sustainability education, which all three are quite interdisciplinary in themselves and leading to my thinking about transdisciplinary as a professor of environmental science prior to this position. I was teaching in a way that was more reductionist and starting to look at my own teaching and learning and how I started imparting a doom and gloom scenario for my students in environmental science by the way I was teaching and not so much the content. Stephen Sterling would call it about sustainability, which we are imparting sustainability knowledge onto students. And Paulo Freire would call it the banking concept of knowledge in and knowledge out. So I found myself very much in this paradigm myself of teaching as an instructor in higher ed at College of Santa Fe in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And then through my program in sustainability education at Prescott College is where I was introduced to Fritjof Capra's work, as well as ecological thinking, and my mentors would tell me to look through the lens of your academic understanding of the natural world and look at it to how you can design learning systems and program design. So that's where I went, and I shouldn't make it sound so easy, but that's where my journey led me for a number of years in my doctoral studies. And drawing from the ecological principles and looking at paradigms of the learning theories that we tend to use in higher education, which are very cognitive domain related to remembering and test taking and lecturing, and thinking myself as an educator, how can I start looking at learning and teaching in a way that would be able to draw students into engaging in changing and enacting change and not leave a course with a sick feeling of pointing fingers. So that led me to understand that in higher education, potentially missing several other domains of learning, which is our emotions and which is our social situations. So the transdisciplinary came into play when I started looking at what learning theories and what does science say about how we can bring our affect into our learning environment, and is it helpful in our learning domains. So my transdisciplinary came into play when I started looking into neuroscience and social and affective neuroscience, predominantly authors like Antonio Damasio, and understanding that visceral sensing and emotion is very much highly connected with cognition and consciousness. So that brings in the transdisciplinariness of learning through neuroscience, and also understanding that human and non-human domain, non-human and human interact, as well as social situations and how we learn. And so I drew from some quantum physics and theoretical physics of and post-structuralist thought and complexity theory, and started mapping these different domains of disciplines into my learning theory, I guess, for sustainability. I think it's called transdisciplinary as opposed to interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, because now we are using disciplines from multiple disciplines and entangling them together to create a new meaning and a new way of knowing, a new way of being, a new way of seeing the world, as opposed to the parts, really looking at it as a whole. And I think that's where the transdisciplinary and newer ways of designing for sustainability is so critical for programs like this and for sustainability in higher education.
That's really fascinating that you really branched out into all these fields. I was also really interested in the first part you said about personal background. We have something in common there, because I also come from a multicultural background, coming from Austria, which is sort of, in the middle of Europe and has a history of a multicultural empire, as it were. And it's quite common in Austria for educated people to speak several languages, for instance. And another thing that we have in common is being influenced by a very strong grandmother. I grew up on a farm in Austria. I spent the first 10 years of my life on a farm, which was managed, the whole household was managed by my grandmother. And so I have a very strong visceral memory, on the one hand, of nature, the experience of nature, and of women in power. So this is something also I think we have in common. So let's talk about how you were able to integrate the Capra course into your EDSU curriculum.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I came here, this program is going into its third year at the University of Wisconsin here. And I think the first one was, there's some things that are more pragmatic, as I was hired to teach, lead, and design the program. So a lot of it I was pretty lucky in that it was in my hands, and your work was in my brain. So I knew that I wanted to bring these together and not only now in the learning system, but in the program design and the curriculum. And by the program design is even bringing partnerships and relationships together in networks into creating a sustainable program, where I know that sometimes in higher education, we could do better with drawing from experts in the field that aren't accredited, or programs that aren't accredited. So how can we co-reciprocate in our relationship to be able to bring experts into a program and be able to enhance the program through through these different ideas. So that's what led me to the Capra course and being familiar with it. So that was one of the areas of the entry points into being able to integrate Capra course into the program is just the position that I happen to be in.
Now, Joy, do you teach your course in a classroom, or is it also online?
The program is fully online. So that's one of the other key ideas, is that being online and Capra course being online, it's a natural fit to be able to include it into our curriculum. Mm-hmm. And also the Capra course is 12 weeks, and our semester at university in the fall and the spring is 16 weeks. So we are able to design our projects, which is we have 3 projects in our curriculum for the program. One project is sort of an intro to being able to see the world ecologically, and we dive deep into and push students into really understanding the world and seeing it so descriptively, and then relating it to society. So they are preparing themselves to start the Capra course. And then the second project predominantly is the Capra course and their engagement in the Capra course, along with the reflection. And we do seminars as well, so we can unpack some of the material that you present in the course.
And what level, may I ask you, what level is the course, and how many credits do they get?
The course is 900 levels, so it's a doctoral level course, and it's for 3 credit hours. Uh-huh. We also, in this course, have slashed it to a 700 level, which is a master's level. And the reason for doing that is now being able to offer this program or this course and some of the other electives to master students as well. So go ahead. And
do you see a good match between the intellectual level of abstraction of the Capra course and your program, or is it, how do you see that?
For just the graduate level itself, or your work?
Yeah, no, for the master's level, is the course appropriate? Is it too technical, not technical enough? What?
Well, so far we've had one master student, and this master student was in a sustainable food systems and community resiliency program that we have here at UWSP as well. Uh-huh. So it was really tied into her understanding of health and wellness. So what we do for the 700 level on my end is we do have a little less assignments that go along with it, but very much still the Capra course is part of it. Mm-hmm. I think it's part of the instructor, is part of my job to foster the students' understanding. So I do touch base with them one-on-one to see where they're at, how they're doing with the course, how are they doing with the material, because a lot of our students don't have the biology background and have learned a lot from the biology and the first few lectures of Capra, but they really it's new for them. So I think that is not a challenge, but something that I am able to help them through as they're needing it.
I think this is generally true, for our course participants. We have heard this in many of the courses, that the first 3 lectures were quite challenging and demanding, and then sort of the course eases off when it comes to the implications and people really get engaged. But I don't think we have had major problems with the lectures. Yeah. Now, another question I have is just a very practical one. You students pay individually for participating in the Capra course, and of course they also pay fees to the university. So how does this work? How could you get them, to pay additional money? That's quite a strain.
Yes, the way we've done it is that we work with your Capra course and getting the students registered, and they pay for it on their own. And for the course, I require the require your book, but I don't require any additional books. So it's very economical, because usually especially in graduate studies, you got a pretty heavy load for books anyway. So in our course, we have a lot of supplemental material that are more in the form of articles that I supplement the course with, but I don't require a lot of other additional books for that course.
Oh, that's very smart. That's brilliant, because we can make this general argument to university professors. We can say, look, it's multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary, and that might be difficult for you from an organizational point of view. But on the other hand, it's all in one book. All you need is one book. And
yeah, and even so, with our library services, we have the book online in our library, so in part of an ebook. So if students couldn't even afford that, we have options for students with supplemental material housed on our guide with the library. So it makes it even more, I think, affordable.
Well, I noticed when we started this last course, which finished a few weeks ago, that your students were very active in our discussion forum. They just posted like crazy the first 2 weeks. So I'm curious to know what did they think of the course now that the course is finished? What did they think about it? Have you had some feedback?
Yes, and I actually was going to read a couple of those the feedbacks, because I'm looking through. The really interesting part of this is for the course. One of the projects I asked for students to write a reflection on the course and then start looking at their problem that they will be tackling at the doctoral level in their research. So it was really, really great to see how they're starting to connect. I think that one of the things just broadly is that we talked about too is that students want more and want to understand how to continue the conversation. So in my course, we use this platform that allows us to have a lot of conversation. So I've created a Capra course channel within my own course that continues on if students have any questions, that we can still continue to dialogue. So I think it's an ongoing conversation. And then potentially an interest in at our residency, which is in the summer, to open the conversation and invite you into our conversation as well, because the students do have questions. As far as what they're doing with the material,
can you say more? What is the residency? What are you talking about?
In the summer for our program, doctoral program that's fully online, we have a 5-day residency in an outdoor setting, and we're able to discuss one-on-one a lot of the material that we're working on. They have student faculty support, and we basically, it's sort of like a retreat as well, and a conference all in one for 5 days. So we're able to bring some of the content that we are still wrestling with in systems thinking and in sustainability, and bring it into our environment in the summer.
Yeah, well, I would be delighted to chime in. We can have a Zoom meeting because there are not very many students, so it's a small group, and we could really get into some depth of discussion during this residency program. That would be great.
Yeah, I think it would be a great idea. I would really like that. I know the students would as well, as they're starting to apply systems thinking to education and how to design curriculum and programs and organizational change.
Mm-hmm. And then beyond that, have you thought about how this could be expanded to other universities? I mean, I feel very strongly that this could be a model for other universities. How would you do it? Or invite other universities in to participate in your program? Is that possible?
Yeah, that's something that we're looking at now. And when I say we, it's my university and the student affairs, and because there is a lot of channels that things have to go through to get approved and to be as interdisciplinary as we are within the School of Education, but also drawing from political ecologists, environmental historians, and all kinds of other professors into our program. So part of this is one of my hopes, is why I do have it slashed as a 700, 900 to bring to allow students from an international audience to come into the course at UWSP, and we're able to do that without being admitted to a program. So say a student's in a program at another university somewhere else in the world, and they wanted to take this ecological foundations course, they can register here at our university, and depending on what their advisor says at their own home university, they would be able to transfer that credit into their own degree program. That's one option that we're able to do. And the other idea too is I really do believe in, as a sustainability educator, to share what we're doing. And this is a first doctoral program of its kind that I know of in educational sustainability, where education is sort of the solution to how we can design sustainable solutions through the vehicle of education. So my hope as a practitioner is to be able to share with other universities or consult with other universities to see how we can start building curriculum and programs that are able to bring in systems thinking in your work as well.
Now, this all sounds absolutely fantastic, and of course, you haven't talked about all the hoops you had to go through and the administrative hassles and everything. And I don't want to go into want you to go into these details, but just let me ask you: do you have somebody among the academic hierarchy, a dean or a vice chancellor, or somebody who is on your side, who champions this? Because it seems to me you need somebody to really to fight for you to be able to do that.
I do, and I'm really fortunate to have our university support this program since its inception. And you're right, everything is takes a lot of different channels to go through, but it is exciting that we have this opportunity to do it, and are open to this kind of a program as well. Our provost is a champion for sure. And I don't know if he's an environmental historian.
I see.
So in our vice chancellor teaching and learning is an ecologist, biologist, so it's kind of a perfect scenario too, I think, of having professors sometimes as our academic affairs unit as well, and a physicist as well, to be able to potentially understand academic side of things and be able to be champions for their university to build sustainable programs, and I think we're pretty fortunate in Wisconsin to have that.
And Joy, more generally, if you look back, you have been in this business now for a number of years. Do you see an increase in flexibility, systemic thinking, desire to be multidisciplinary? How does this compare with 10 years ago or 5 years ago? What can you say about that?
Yes, that's why I got into this to begin with, because again, back when I was an environmental science instructor, this word sustainability kept coming up in the early 2000s in our textbooks. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's, since then, it has evolved into, I won't go into the history of what sustainability education and all that we could go towards, but just being in the field in higher ed and paying attention to other universities, I do see an uptake in sustainability programming in higher education, and really starting to connect with other disciplines within the university to be able to react to what sustainability is, because it is so interdisciplinary and it is challenging, I think, but there's organizations like here in the United States, we have ASHE, that are really trying hard to build curriculum for these types of complex problems that we're facing in the world. So I see a momentum, I see an uptake for sure of this type of programming in higher education.
Great, fantastic. Well, it'll be great to hear from other parts in the world, since we have many listeners here from various parts in the world. Unless you want to add something else, Joy, that we haven't covered?
No, I mean, just little pieces here and there, but I'll let us take it from here with questions and see where it takes us, and I would be happy to answer anything else.
So Phoebe, maybe you could take
Yeah.
over, facilitate that.
Yeah, so we've got a couple questions coming in, and then I think, Joy and Fritjof, maybe you want to, maybe these spark more bits of discussion as you go. So we've got a question here from Maximilian, who says, due to various conceptions of transdisciplinarity out there, I would like to ask what Joy exactly means when she uses the term, and potentially whether or not Fritjof has something to add.
So more clarity on what transdisciplinary is.
Or how you're using the term, because he's saying that there are various different conceptions of that.
Right, it is between interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary and then transdisciplinary. I think the way I use the transdisciplinary is two things. One, I think it comes from a epistemology of a the postmodern or post-structuralism way of thinking, of a little more fluidity in how we design and think about the world and programs. And so when I think about transdisciplinary, I look at these diverse disciplines, science, for example, like I said, the neuroscience, and education, transformative learning, and systems thinking, that all are you could consider them from different disciplines, right? I look at the relationships between these different disciplines and relationally map them to find common themes within them to be able to create a new design. So I think it's, again, back at post-structuralist thinking, which is taking our existing and bringing it and folding it into a newer way of thinking. That's sort of what I look at, as opposed to interdisciplinary, where you have diverse disciplines and you're drawing from those disciplines, but they're still within their own structure.
Fritjof, do you have anything to add to that?
I have never been very concerned about exactly which terms to use, to tell you the truth. I use multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary, but my main focus is on the nature of life, a systemic understanding of life. And as you know, in my work, I have integrated 4 dimensions of life: the biological, first of all, but then also the cognitive, and it's tightly linked to the biological because cognition is understood as the very process of life. So cognition and life are very, very tightly linked. And then there are not only individual biological organisms, but there are also ecosystems, networks of organisms. And then you can apply the systemic perspective to these ecosystems. And of course, there are social systems, both in the animal world and in the human world. So it's a very tight network of the biological, cognitive, social, and ecological dimension, and all these interactions. And of course, when it comes to sustainability, then we see that all these dimensions interact and need to interact. So that has been my approach. And I wasn't too worried about exactly which term to use.
Great. That makes total sense to me. And I think it's interesting, Joy, what you say about instead of kind of drawing on different disciplines which remain separate, you're really talking about a completely new way of looking at, disciplinarity, if I was understanding correctly.
Yeah, I think that's why. I mean, and I appreciate different ideas too, and it doesn't mean I like what Fritjof is saying as well, is basically the same thing as you think of these different components and not isolating them to a certain field.
So we have another question from Drew Schumacher, who asks, who says, more than anything, I'm curious as to the application of this additional layer of understanding provided by the course outside of academia. So it's quite a broad question. I think what I'm understanding is, what is it? Hearing about the application of Capra course and adding this additional way of learning.
Well,
how does it add to what's in academia?
Yeah, if I may say so, what we're trying to do in our alumni forum and alumni network, and in these webinars and in alumni meetings, which we also have on the Zoom platform, global alumni meetings, what we're trying to do is precisely explore how systemic thinking can be applied in various areas. Now, in this webinar with Professor O'Neill, we are focusing on the academic world. But in the other webinars, we have focused on design, on architecture and community building, and we'll have others. So I'm afraid we'll have to leave this for another time. But I can assure you that we are very eager to apply systems thinking and to discuss its applications to many other fields in upcoming webinars.
I think maybe another thing that maybe Drew was wanting to ask, I'm just trying to read into the written question, but around like what are the elements that Capra course really brings to the existing education system, and how does the way we do learning at Capra course really enrich learning? And I think Fritjof, what you're saying about actually having a practice-based approach and being much more applied than the traditional education system, and really engaging people in their professional lives and facilitating webinars and things. These are all very different, right, Joy, to the existing education system.
And while I'm using it for design of curriculum programs, for example, the students that I teach are applying it to their practice, their professionals, not only in traditional education, but non-formal and informal education as well. If we have all the bios on our website of the students, but we have a student who's a chef who's looking at sustainable food systems. There's environmental education. There's journeyman worker who's looking at unions and political ecology and how to build systems thinking. So it's the program itself and the students that are in this program are from non-formal, formal, and informal systems of teaching, learning, leadership, organizational change, and how to use systems thinking within how they will apply. It's very much of an applied program of practice, so they can draw from. I asked one of my students, who is a student who's from China, if I would be able to share her story, what she's doing, and she's building sustainability curriculum in China at a very large level. And so this course and this program is, she's able to draw from the worldview of ecological paradigm that includes aspects of planetary values, environmental values, ecosystems, biodiversity, holistic health, ecological design into an educational paradigm based on ecological thinking, and how she wants to approach that through whole systems thinking as a model that she learned in the Capra course as well, and to reorient our worldview and redesign of educational thinking and practices. And she's working on a pretty large project on competencies and in sustainability in China. So that's I guess a practice example of how bringing this idea into the field.
In my experience, when I think back on the forum discussions we had in this past course and in earlier courses, there are many people in a sort of typical situation where they would, for instance, they would be healthcare professionals, mm-hmm. or they would be in agriculture, or they would be designers, or they would be community organizers. And they would have an intuitive feeling of systems thinking, of connecting the dots, of knowing that things all hang together, of knowing that it's important to talk about relationships. And but they can't quite put it together into a coherent picture. And what they often tell us is that the Capra course really helps them to do that, gives them a scientific basis for doing that, or a scientific reference for doing that. And I think that's the greatest help that we can offer when they're already halfway there, you know. If they haven't heard anything about systems thinking, that it sort of tends to be off-putting. Oh, living systems, autopoiesis, metabolism, you know, all these big words. But if they're already halfway there, then it's really useful for them to put things completely together into a coherent picture.
That's really good. And what you asked about what other assignments they do in that course, with this project too that they're engaged in with yours, is a problem, reflection, and then a map. So you provide a really great map of what the whole course is going to be on one PDF, one file. And so I asked the students to study that and start looking at their problem and their solutions through connecting it more. And from, I think, again, I have these students prior to this course, so seeing their learning from of their understanding of connectedness and networks from a semester ago even to after the course and after the program, I see a change in how they start thinking more complexly.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Great. I had a question here that kind of followed on quite nicely, which was from Tanuja, who asked, one of the key things about systems thinking is that it does not separate mind and body, analytical and experiential learning. How do you incorporate that non-separation into the teaching methodology?
Let me, Joy, before you start, let me jump in here and say, as I emphasized in the course, the systems thinking, connecting mind and body, is really the sort of higher level or more sophisticated level of systems thinking. And this is what I call the systems view of life. The early systems thinking, cybernetics, general systems theory, you know, Jay Forrester, all these people, even today, the people at MIT, Peter Senge and his group, they don't really do this. So the Santiago theory of cognition and really connecting mind, matter, and life, you know, into a coherent picture is really the latest and most sophisticated version of systems thinking, in my view. So in answer to the question, I let you go on from there and answer the question.
I would, with the question that I'm not sure if we have a new question, but I would agree to that, as well as the living systems. And I mean, there's different ways of looking at systems thinking, like you said, and ours, and again, for education. And I think someone asked a question about, is a program centered on nature? It's looking at, it's ecological thinking is a component of one of another core principle is pluralistic society. We have, you know, several other core principles, but today we're focusing on living systems thinking. I think that the training of looking at the natural world can really help us understand the human world. And so while I could have looked at other systems thinking to connect, I think that for education, naturally we're in a social world, and so I think that it's just a really natural fit for.
I think, Joy, what Tanuja was asking, the way I understood it, is that since this systems view of life forges a very tight link between mind and body, between mind, matter, and life, if you project this onto the academic world, this would be a tight link between the natural sciences and the humanities. And so, as we know, in the academic world, they are often very separated and fragmented. So how do you handle that? How do you introduce this systems view of life into an academic world where the natural science and the humanities are quite separate?
That's such a big question. I'm just doing it. You just talk to your neighbors. I talk to my colleagues, and when I put even this webinar out, I shared it with, the network of disciplinary experts on my university. And I received responses from like the environmental philosopher who's in humanities, and it was like, wow, what a great opportunity, Fritjof Capra. And so I think it's just expanding and sharing and communicating with your network to be able to say, hey, we speak a lot of the same languages, even though I'm in the School of Education and you're in the College of Letters and Sciences, and we could really start connecting and just starting that with short communications. And so I think that's really been really fascinating, and I love that part of my job is being able to really communicate and network and talk to other disciplinary experts.
And I think, that the very term network is a very powerful political tool for us to make these connections. Because today you don't have to convince people that we're living in a networked world. Everybody knows that and accepts that. And you don't have to convince them that we live in a complex world. And so if you can tell them, hey, I've got a whole framework to deal with networks and with complexity, and this is what it's called, and this is what we're doing, why don't you come and join us and check us out? I think that's a very good way of doing it.
Someone asked a question you said about the pedagogy, so the experiential in the mind body, and how do you do that online?
Yeah, so that was the kind of root of Tanuja's question, I think, was how do you incorporate that non-separation between mind and body, analytical and experiential, into the teaching methodology? And I think maybe something like hearing more about the residency would be really interesting. And staring at a screen is not something that takes us closer to that.
I think what would be really fascinating is having another one of these with actually students, and not maybe just these students, but other online students, or having a conversation of how do you do that online, because it's a whole really great topic of being able to connect. Just in short, there are some. I was just talking to Fritjof about how this Saturday we're offering a writing retreat here in Wisconsin, and over half of our students, we have 23, our program's just starting, so some are even flying in not only from Wisconsin but coming to our writing retreat, so we're able to connect in person and write and talk, socialize, and emote and feel and ski and do all those other things you do in Wisconsin. So I think adding in these components where you can connect, and then summer residency, like you said, is another time where we work together and connect. And it's the design, I think, of what differentiates, I think, the field of sustainability education is intentionally designing the learning experience to foster transformation or transformative learning. And it may not happen, it may be different for everybody but to allow that time to be able to work through the material. So there's a lot of layers to that answer. A lot of it also relies on our pedagogy for our online platform. And that's one that we've been working and struggling with because, as you know, online platforms are very stagnant and concrete for a good reason, especially for undergraduate. For some, I guess it depends on your epistemology, right? Your way of thinking. I think that has a lot to do with it. So we try to have a learning environment that is very social in nature and emergent, and building and living systems thinking into even how we design and think about how we communicate. It is okay for a student. We don't have advising sessions, for example. They can chat. It's called chat in the platform that we use. Chat me and ask me a question, and it engages not just me but our other faculty and affiliates that are part of the program into a network within our learning environment that I'm creating that allows for it to be way more touch-based. And then we have a learning environment that's just for the course. So we do use two that we go back and forth with to ensure that we have that experiential pedagogy as much as you can that's on an online platform.
I think that's really important to hear that, because it shows that although this is an online course, you don't just plug it in and say to the students, here you go, and then you can go and do something else. But you're really creating these learning environments. You're constantly facilitating, you're constantly nurturing the students, and that's really important to know. And in fact, you can say something similar, not to that extent, but a little bit similar about the Capra course itself, because we have now created all kinds of events around it. First of all, we have our discussion forum, but then we also have the alumni network, we have projects, we have face-to-face alumni meetings. We just had one yesterday here near San Francisco of about a dozen people, and I can tell you I've been now to 5 or 6 of these alumni meetings in various cities around the world, and here in California. And there's tremendous energy in all these meetings, because we all share the same conceptual framework, the same values, and we're eager to apply it and eager to collaborate. And so there's a lot of work going on around the course, around the recorded lectures. And I'm really happy to hear you say that you do this even more.
Yeah, I think that it does require just to think about how you connect with this, again, social systems, connect a little bit differently, and use technology for to not isolate in online learning platforms, but to be able to connect.
Great. We had someone who asked wrote quite a long piece of text. So I was just going to try and summarize. I think the question from R. Daniels is around asking about whether your program centers on nature as the primary concern of our kind of global challenges, and the fact that this narrative that humans are kind of bioengineers of the environment in a destructive way. Or a different way of asking the question might be, can you tell us a bit more about the kind of central narrative to the module that includes Capra course, and then also in a broader way the entire doctoral program? What do you think are the central storylines or the narratives that you focus on and unpick? It would be really interesting just to hear more about the curriculum and maybe some other, bodies of work that sit beside Capra course. And just hearing a bit more in detail.
Yeah, this is a good question. And this is one of the questions that we have in our course that we have. I try to do the curriculum and scaffolded in. So, for example, along with the Capra course, the cohort was also taking a course called Historical and Philosophical Foundations for a Sustainable Society. So within that, they're taking that Ecological Foundations course, and this is their second semester, so there's a lot of foundational core work. So it's definitely living systems principles were a core. And the other one was environmental and sustainability, so to try to understand both the historical understanding of where we are with our environment globally, and what's this whole thing about sustainability education and the sustainable development goals, and sort of that whole narrative of what sustainability is. Very much not environmental, but only. The program is very much within the pillars of sustainability, if you want to say, understanding different contexts within economics and social situation, social justice and environmental sustainability. Again, back to some of our students, we have a business student who's an accountant. But you've gained from the course understanding and appreciation, I think, from the environment, but also in socially and economically. Ecological economics is a focus as well. And so I think the whole curriculum is very much more of a holistic approach to understanding where we are in the world today. And students don't need to draw on only nature or environmental problems. that we're facing, because it's very much connected to social justice is another really big area that we do focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I just said about the course was historical and philosophical, and they're taking the ecological foundations at the same time. And it is funny because sometimes I've heard students say, I don't even know what course I'm in anymore. It's all like so connected. I'm like, yes, that's what you want to feel. It's actually good. So they're feeling that there is almost this weaving of the curriculum. Mm. And then as the designer next semester is a carry on into to scaffolding what they're taking next, which is a transformative learning course and a reorienting curriculum and programs course. Now they're even able to pull further into their design processes into some practice and understanding what this change is all about. What is change? Why are we changing? In a course that's specifically focused on transformation. So anyway, I hope that gives you an idea of sort of it's very much intentional in the design, and I don't even explain this to students really in this sense either. It's just a natural fit, and you feel it. You feel what's coming next, and then they start researching their own projects. But they have this toolbox, and they have been thinking about it all along. In historical and philosophical, for example, they're writing their positionality, and so they're already looking at what these epistemologies that we talk about, or relational ontologies, and so they're bringing that forward into the next. So they kind of feel, what is a humanistic perspective? What is a planetary perspective? And that's really that doctoral level of understanding the world and allowing them to decide if they're interested in more of the critical pedagogy aspects of it or the holistic. And it's very much allows them the space to design where their future is. But I don't define that for them.
So in a way, Joy, you are implicitly talking about transformative learning, about not only accumulating knowledge, but also being transformed as a person and having one's life transformed. Do you touch on that explicitly also?
Yes, the whole course on it next semester on transformative learning and looking at different perspectives of transformation.
Oh, great. I'd love to take this course. That's great.
I'm excited. I love it. It's really, and again, it's the student's perspective. There's individual change. There's and there's the theories that go along with these different changes based on the theories that you use, like Jungian perspective, individuation. I mean, it goes into detail on the types of transformation because back to post-structure, the posts, I guess, there's sustainability in itself is not one defined way of doing it. You really are finding your entry point in your context and how you want to solve those problems in your contexts.
Joy, I think it's really fascinating, like the amount of research and thinking and different disciplines that you've woven into designing this course. I can see in the chat there are people from other education institutions who are just making comments. So Carlos says, great to hear, Joy, and we do the same in a business school and in international relations, cultural and language studies with various universities. There's someone who talks about teaching systems thinking to the oil industry. There's a couple of people kind of chiming in. So it's great to see that we've got some other academics and teachers around. I was wondering whether you would be open to maybe sharing like a list of some of the key works that you'd recommend for educators out there in designing systems thinking courses or integrating systems thinking into their courses alongside obviously all of Fritjof's work that you seem to be really familiar with and kind of steeped in. Maybe you could put together a list.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Or if anyone wants to connect with me, I get excited about bringing our network and more and more engaged with people in the world, and to consult if anyone was interested in how to design. And like I said, even like that was my dissertation on drawing from ecological principles into how we design learning systems and curriculum programs. Because I found that was a kind of a disconnect in the field of sustainability education, is to actually design in how we're teaching and learning in sustainability. So I would be able to do that. I would love to share some of the articles and other work and design with others.
And the other thing I was thinking about, Joy, we talked about your residency program. When is this in the summer? Which month?
The residency summer is in June.
In June. If we do a session with your students, and if you would allow us to make this available to our alumni network, I think this would be fabulous, because then we would hear from the students how this meshes with the academic framework. That would be fascinating.
That would be great, and really to get their perspective of what they're doing in the practice that someone asked about, how they're putting this into practice and what does that look like. I know our students and anybody else who would be interested would be welcome to that, as well as if you wanted to put it on your network as well.
Great, thank you.
Great. We can keep everyone up to date and post about that on the Facebook page, and send something out in our alumni newsletter. There's someone who's just chimed in to say that it's all been really interesting, and that they work at the Open University here in England, and they've been developing digital pedagogy models. So that's from Sheila Butler. And obviously, I know, having worked at Schumacher College, there's also all sorts of kind of collaborations between Schumacher and the Open University, and great to be connected. Somebody has just asked, how do students from other countries participate? Is it an international program, and how do they find out more about that? And then somebody else is wondering how you define sustainability in the course. So maybe just to hear about those two things.
Okay, so the first one, I can answer really easy. The second one's always a trip
it's a
up.
meaty one.
Depends on how you want to look at it. I might have to draw from Capra's definition for that. So I think the first one, it's an international program. Just to give you a tiny bit about how we're able to do this program, because we are a state university. Programs run under a little bit of a different business model, which is, I think, exciting and innovative in itself, in that there is a set course fee, whether you're, international doesn't work, but if you're national out of state, it's the same cost, which is very reasonable. So it is international. You can go onto our website and apply. It is online. We do have international student in our second cohort, and prospective international students. Our deadline for our cohort 3 is application is February 6th. That starts in June, that June residency, June 10th. So that's in prep for that. So we're recruiting right now. We're reviewing admissions right now for cohort 3, and it's very much international. And we have and that's my hope and excitement, like I said, from my background, even I've lived in other countries too, in Japan for 5 years. And I really feel I'm really passionate about the global thinking and what we can learn from each other from a global perspective in sustainability. And that's my hope, to really broaden that audience in not only at this university, but how to create bigger, broader networks. And I think that's what's so enticing to our students taking in the Capra course, and some of the responses I've received from them is being able to work and hear and listen to other people from all over the world. So, and it goes into the ecological principle of diversity, right? So I think that's very welcomed, and it is an international program. The other question was, what's the definition of sustainability?
What is the definition of sustainability that you use on the course? And then they went on to just say a little bit. They said, as we know by now, sustainability has become a buzzword, and it means different things to different people, and it applies differently to different contexts. So how do you grapple all of that?
Well, it's funny, because I was looking at one of Fritjof's books before the Hidden Connections, and where he talks about the definition. The definition of the Brundtland Report, for example, of 1987, talks about more of a not really a definition, but a moral extortion of the word, and how you want to go into looking at the operational definition of ecological sustainability, and the realization that we do not need to invent sustainable human communities from scratch, but model them after nature's ecosystems, which are sustainable communities of plants, animals, and microorganisms. So I think that we have an operational definition through the ecological principles of what sustainability is. And those ecological principles are networks, cycles, energy, partnerships, diversity, and dynamic balance. And I think those are key ingredients to be able to start fostering a environmentally and economically and socially sound world, whether we're working on local issues or global issues.
Great, thank you. We've just got a couple minutes left, so just having a look at the final questions. Here's something from Budawin, who asks, I'm very interested to hear how this course changes the students' outlook on life. How do they fit into society and their relationship with nature? And I think this is a really interesting question to end on, because, you know, it's kind of where do the students go after the course? And I know at Schumacher often a lot of the students have difficulty actually after taking the master's courses in ecological design or holistic science, because society isn't at the place where they are learning, like to learn to think in that way. Most of society is not thinking in that way.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do know that from this, again, from the experience of teaching this in this program and teaching especially the transformation part, it very much is in the way I designed the pedagogy, the curriculum, it very much allows for a student to explore and to introspect and understand their place in the world, because I think if we want to enact change in the world, it starts with who we are as well and what we're doing. So we very much look at our own position, our own worldview, and it is transformative. Not always, and that definition's very, it depends on what kind, but it seems like there's some experience that students are trying to wrestle with, because what kind of change are they making or want to make? I wanted to read a couple quotes of testimonials from the program and from the Capra course from some students who went through the experience. And they say things like, it broadens, the Capra course connects well with educational sustainability. It broadens my worldview of the connectedness of all different systems in the world. And specifically, it helps me better make connections from personal and professional situations to other systems and how to connect them. Capra and the program component has brought a personalized nature to the conversation about living systems and the many social, biological, and cognitive processes. So those are some of the things that they have to say. Another one is, I'm beginning to make sense of the world that surrounds me and those who I come in contact with. Program has changed the way I view problems in the world and how we can approach solutions through multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches, integrating whole systems to tackle the wicked problems we face today.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing this. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Fritjof, maybe have you got any final remarks, or I'll hand it over to you and Joy just to wrap up with final thoughts, final reflections.
I just want to thank Joy that this was a wonderful conversation. I must say it far exceeded my expectations. I was a little afraid that the whole conversation would be too much about administrative details and how to fit the course into the academic framework, but it was really very broad, transdisciplinary, so to speak. And I really enjoyed it, and I'm very happy that so many people joined us and also participated in the conversation, so I'm delighted. Thank you, Joy, for joining us. It was great. And thank you, Phoebe, for facilitating it so expertly in your usual way.
Thank you. Thanks, Fritjof. Joy, do you have any final remarks before we sign off? everybody is posting with a lot of enthusiasm in the group chat.
I just want to thank Fritjof, Capra, and I thank you, Phoebe, for having me. And it's just interesting, I think, is when you're going through your scholarship or your research yourself, which I did. I've had conversations with Fritjof for a number of years, but you didn't even know it. So I know there's a lot of us out there who draw from different experts or different works in the field, and it is an honor to be able to see its emergence of where I am today with designing a program that I'm hoping that we have more of someday in the country and in the world. And it's a pleasure to be able to be at this point now, and I appreciate it and hope that others who are studying or researching are able to reach out to some of the people that really touch them as well, and be able to have opportunities like this to share the conversation. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. And just to remind listeners that we have now officially opened sign-ups to the spring edition of Capra course. So really excited to be already receiving sign-ups and applications. And please, our alumni are our best ambassadors. So all of us at Capra course are very grateful for everyone who helps spread the word and helps introduce Capra course to more and more places of the world and more people from different disciplines. And with that, I think we'll say goodbye, and a big thank you to everyone who joined us today from all different parts of the world. I've recorded the webinar, and I will be posting it on YouTube and then sharing it from the Capra course Facebook page, which is Fritjof Capra's Capra course on Facebook. And I can also post it in the Facebook event of this webinar, which was shared by the University of Wisconsin. I can't remember the full name. UWSP.
Yeah. And Phoebe, just and then we'll see you in Fritjof. We'll see you in fall, because our cohort 3 that we don't have.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. So, okay. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you, Joy. Bye.
Thank you.